Hola, bienvenidos a Nueva Narrativa, al abierto número 27, donde hoy vamos a tener el privilegio de contar con una de las mentes más privilegiadas del mundo. Un auténtico visionario, un futurista por excelencia. Él es Bruce Mau, es canadiense, vive en Chicago y ha participado y trabajado con mentes asombrosas como Frank Gehry, Rem Koolhaas y Jaime Lerner, el reinventor de Curitiba en Brasil. Bruce Mau entendió hace muchos años lo que ahora empezamos a entender muchos, y es que el diseño va mucho más allá de los aspectos visuales como habíamos creído. Bruce Mau dice y prueba que el diseño es una herramienta, probablemente la herramienta más importante para atravesar procesos y resolver problemas, independientemente del área en la que nos movamos. Eso lo que quiere decir es que todos estamos llamados a ser diseñadores y a aplicar el diseño como esa herramienta a lo largo de todos nuestros distintos retos y resolución de problemas. Bruce Mau viene hoy a compartirnos un poquito de su visión, que es inmensa, y de sus herramientas que acaban de ser publicadas por Phaidon en un maravilloso libro que se llama MC24, 24 principios para hacer cambio masivo, Massive Change, que es uno de los grandes proyectos en los que Bruce Mau ha estado trabajando en los últimos años. Y el libro realmente es una guía muy práctica para poder implementar estos 24 principios, adaptándolas como herramientas en nuestros distintos retos, tanto a nivel individual y personal como profesional y como ciudadanos. Voy a compartir este espacio con María del Carmen Aceña y con Mónica Stein, vicerrectora de la Universidad del Valle, ambas mujeres guatemaltecas extraordinarias. Los primeros 35 minutos se los vamos a dar a Bruce para que nos pueda compartir un poquito de su visión y algunos de los principios de los que habla en el libro. Y luego los otros 25 minutos va a ser una conversación entre Bruce, María del Carmen, Mónica y yo. Y a las 7 abrimos el íntimo para poder tener una media hora de una conversación caliente donde los invitamos a ustedes a participar, a aprovechar que tenemos a Bruce hoy con nosotros para hacerles las preguntas directas en vivo y que juntos podamos no solo abrir esta conversación, sino dejarla abierta para poder elevar la discusión y poder encontrar las herramientas necesarias que nos ayuden a reinventarnos como guatemaltecos y como país. Thank you very much, Bruce, for being with us. The space is all yours, and it's an honor to have you here at Nueva Narrativa.
Thank you, Emilio. I'm really excited to be seeing you again and being able to meet with you today. So I'm going to go through a kind of journey for me that has been, a pretty extraordinary experience to really understand what the full potential of design could be, and really to kind of help people get beyond the idea of limiting design to the visual. Mostly we still think of design as a visual practice, but if you take the core of design, which is really empathy and trying to understand the experience of someone else, and problem solving in the biggest sense, you realize that it's a method that is really central to our future success. We released just a few weeks ago this book called MC24. It's really about the principles of working this way, of thinking about design in this holistic way, and really applying it to your life and work. It starts with this kind of insight that, this is actually the first paragraph of the book, that practically everything we do today needs to change. Almost everything we're doing is done in the old way. It's done as if we have unlimited resources, as if waste is not a problem. We treat nature like a pantry and a toilet, and we think short term, party like there's no tomorrow. and we pass the check to future generations. We expect someone else to clean up the mess that we've created. We dump problems we can't solve into places we can't see, and many of the solutions we create cause more problems than they correct. So we realize that there's a kind of urgency like never before. So I want to start with context. This is where we're at. We're now at 7.8 billion, and you can see that the more developed countries are flattening out. Most of the, almost all the big growth is happening in the less developed countries. That's the world that we're living in today. The good news is that we have success problems, not failure problems. We've succeeded in solving so many problems that we're now at a new higher order complexity problem. And we're now 7.8 billion. If we had failed more frequently, we'd be 1 billion people. And it really wouldn't matter how we behave. But at 8 billion, everything counts. The good news is that we are going to solve the problems with new tools. And this is the work of Ray Kurzweil, and he shows that our capacity is doubling at a very consistent rate. So you have an exponential growth of possibility. And you can see that, just how kind of regular it has been. And he shows even through like world wars and depressions, we continue to build our capacity. And he shows that around, right around now, we're able to put the processing capacity of a mouse brain into, in your pocket for $1,000. By 2025, we'll put a human brain. And by 2050, we'll put all human brains. So you'll have, as a tool to work with, to think, you'll have a device that has the processing capacity of all the human brains on the planet, which is really quite extraordinary. The urgency, the bad news now is that we have only 10 years to really avoid global disaster, according to the IPCC. The good news is that people are really mobilizing. People like Greta are kind of changing consciousness and awareness. And now we face this. And this is a kind of, on top of that crisis, we have this crisis. And so the challenges are really, quite stark and extraordinary. I just want to take a moment on, how I got to be here and part of your conversation. I grew up on a farm outside of a mining town in northern Canada. We had, our house was built on a kind of rocky hill, which meant that we didn't have running water in the winter. And for most of my life, I thought that was just my previous life. I didn't see how it was relevant to my work as a designer. But over time, I realized that actually having that experience, my job as a young man was to go to the well in the valley each day and provide water to the household during the winter months. And I know what it means to do that. I know how heavy water is. I know how much water 7 people use. It's an experience I share with about 1 billion people. And so you realize that actually that empathy, that idea of experiencing or understanding an experience of someone else is really the core of my practice and my work. I became a designer. I didn't really sort of know what that was at the time, but I was very interested in ideas and images and putting them together. And that turns out to be graphic design, and I really kind of fell in love. Books were really my first kind of obsession as a designer, and I've designed over 260 of them. And they became kind of more and more important to the way that I work and think. I consider myself one of the most fortunate designers of the last half century. I worked with people like Frank Gehry, and I worked with MoMA to move them into their new digs. In the process of my work, I became an author because I saw the computer coming. The computer was first introduced. One of the first applications was typography. And when I saw that happening, I realized this is going to really change everything. And I wanted to do research, and to research, I had to write. So in the process, I became an author. I didn't really think of myself that way, but that's what happened. This was one of the first things I wrote. It's an incomplete manifesto for growth, which was really a kind of effort to try to understand how do we sustain a creative life. I worked with Rem Koolhaas on the Seattle Public Library. We published a book called SMLXL on the culture of architecture. I've designed, stadiums and carpets, and one of the most extraordinary projects I've been involved in is redesigning Mecca. And if you had told me, if you had met me at the well when I was a young man and said, you really should pay attention because you're going to have to design Mecca, I would have said, that's not possible. That's not going to happen. But in fact, it did. We did a 1,000-year plan for the future of Mecca. In 2004, we produced a project called Massive Change. And it really, the back cover kind of says it best. It's not about the world of design, it's about the design of the world. It's about our capacity to really shape the world. And it was based really on a quotation by this man, Arnold Toynbee. Toynbee was a British historian. He wrote a 20-volume history of the world. And he said that the 20th century, in a long sweep of history, when you look back in 200 or 300 years, we're going to recognize it as an era in which we dared to imagine the welfare of the whole human race as a practical objective. And when he used the term practical objective, he made it a design project. It was really about, how do we design for the whole human race? And I thought, wow, that's the biggest idea I've ever heard. That's what really inspires me. I think all designers are doing that. They probably wouldn't say it in that way, in that grand way, but they're working on their part of it. So we started a school called the Institute Without Boundaries, and we did the project Massive Change, and it opened in Vancouver, then went to Toronto and Chicago. And it really was a life-changing experience for me and for a lot of people involved, because we met a few hundred of the world's great optimists and innovators, people taking on the toughest challenges, in history. We met the people who took smallpox off the face of the earth. And if you think about, what that means, especially in a pandemic, you realize just, how powerful that is. So we really tried to understand what we call design economies, the regions of your life that are being designed and redesigned, and the kind of capacity that's being developed in order to shape it. We looked at market economies and the image economy and even the living economy, that we're actually designing life itself. And it was a quite profound experience. What we discovered in the end is that we're actually in the process of redesigning wealth. That, of course, we have capital as one form of wealth, but we have new currencies being developed, wealth of information, wealth of access, wealth of mobility, et cetera. And all those new kind of forms of wealth are not yet fully understood and not yet kind of regulated or understood in the way that they get exchanged. This is probably the most important diagram that came out of the work. The most important idea, really. It's changing the kind of order of things, the place of design in the world. The diagram on the left is the kind of old way of thinking, that design is a subset of business, that business happens in a cultural context, and culture happens in the natural world. And that kind of order of things seemed like a pretty solid long-term idea. What we saw was that we were changing that diagram in a very fundamental way, that we were putting all of those things, nature, culture, and business, into a design practice, that we were actually designing business, we were designing culture, and we were even designing nature. And, when I first started talking about this, people were, understandably skeptical and accused me of being a megalomaniacal nut. That I just wanted to control everything. And my response was, it's not about control, it's actually about responsibility. And you can see around the world where we fail to design, we design for failure. Where we fail to design the ecosystems that sustain us, we destroy them, they collapse. And you can see all over the world that we're actually now, having done that in many places, we're now returning with design method to recover those ecologies that we once destroyed. And so this is really a new set of responsibilities for designers. And it puts design really at the kind of boardroom table. It really puts design in the kind of biggest conversations. When I did that exhibit, we broke attendance records. We beat Warhol and Picasso, and with the design exhibit. And they asked me to go to a high school in Vancouver and do a presentation. I talked to a Toynbee and this quote and the importance of the welfare of the whole human race and what an extraordinary idea it was. And a young woman came to the microphone after the presentation. She said, Mr. Mao, I think you're not thinking big enough. And I said, most people don't accuse me of that, but tell me more. And she said, well, the welfare of the whole human race was the 20th century project. And, he was right about that. But the 21st century is about the welfare of all of life as a practical objective, and not just humans. And she really blew me away. I was really stunned. I realized you're absolutely right. This is, what kind of high school is this? But you're absolutely right. It was a blind spot. It was looking at it from a previous era and thinking that we are the most important thing. And what we learned in the last century is that actually we're not. Life is the most important thing. And so it's really the welfare of all of life is our project now. About 10 years ago, I was made an honorary royal designer for industry in London, part of the RSA. And they sent a group of young leaders to meet with us here in Chicago. And we showed them our work, and much like I'm doing now. And they said, what kind of designer are you? And I said, well, I'm a designer. This is what we do. And they said, well, we think of design being defined by the product. In other words, a graphic designer does two-dimensional things, and a product designer does products, and an architect does buildings. But you're doing cities and carpets and social movements and institutions and brands and businesses. How do you do this? And I was a little bit irritated. I said, I just showed you. You should have paid attention. And they said, no, you showed us the results, but you didn't actually mention in any way how you think or how you do it. My wife and I, BC Williams, is partners with me, and we realized we actually didn't know. We did it intuitively, and it had evolved over a 25-year period. We just figured out how to do really thorny problems, and that we had in fact had a method, but we had never really written it down. And so we decided, I don't know is probably not a good answer. So let's figure out, are there principles that we can apply, that anyone could apply? If we could do that, we could help a lot of people start to work this way and have the kind of impact that we're having. And that really was the kind of impulse to create the MC24. And these are the 24 principles. And, they're in some cases kind of profoundly disorienting. They change fundamentally the kind of remit or the responsibility, the kind of job of the designer. So when we say we're not separate from or above nature, for thousands of years in the West, we were told that we own nature, that it's ours to use up, that it is endlessly abundant, that it's kind of limitless. And in the last century, we've discovered with the scientific method that actually none of that is true. That is, it is profoundly limited. We are nature, we are part of it. And the idea that somehow we are exempt from its laws is a fiction. And once you start to see that, you realize this is a completely different world, and I've got to change the way that I live and the way that I do business and that my institutions, my governance. I mean, it can be really profound. And so what we've tried to do in the book is really kind of introduce these principles, these working concepts, And it's like a toolkit. It's not a linear method. You don't always start with the hammer and then go to the screwdriver. You have to know what the tools do, and then you look at the situation and you apply the tools. Obviously, there's a kind of method of start to finish, but these are really the tools that allow you to do really difficult challenges. More recently, I joined the board of a new school of architecture in Northern Canada, in my hometown, the MacEwan School of Architecture. And it's a school that is the first new architecture school in Canada in 40 years. And it's a French, English, and Indigenous cultural collaboration. So I've been going up to Northern Canada and spending time with these folks, and I discovered that they have a cosmology which is really the destination that I've been working towards. It doesn't put man or humans at the center. It puts life at the center. In other words, we are part of life. We honor and respect life along with all the other creatures that we share the planet with. And it's a fundamentally different mindset. And it really changes everything. And one of the projects that they do, this pictured here, is the students go into the forest with an elder, an Indigenous elder, and they find a birch bark tree that is ready to give up its bark, and they make a birch bark canoe together in the way that it was done for thousands of years. And when that birch bark canoe is finished, if it's broken or eventually doesn't work anymore, everything in it goes back to the earth. You can simply leave it in the forest and it becomes input for the next generation of life. So that's really how we got to MC24 and what we call life-centered design. And that really kind of puts life at the center and helps us to rethink everything that we do so that we have an opportunity for perpetuity on the planet. So I wanted to touch on a few of the principles in more depth and just kind of get a little more deeply into them. So the first one is, it's important that it is the first one because, even though the process isn't linear, this one is the one that in some ways starts everything. And it is first inspire. Design is leadership, lead by design. We can't make people do things. We don't have the power. We're not kind of omniscient. We can't actually make things happen. What we can do is inspire people. And for most designers, that's a kind of secondary or kind of possible outcome. Our approach is to say, no, that's actually our first responsibility. It's our central role. We have the ability to imagine a future and systematically execute that vision. So we can create a vision, and Simon Sinek talks about how important a vision is because it's visual, right? We can see it. Designers have an extraordinary power to actually visualize things. And so we have this kind of capacity to inspire. And what that means is we can change the world with this imagination and the power of design. And that possibility of actually imagining a future and systematically executing that future is really what the core of design method is. And that's the best definition of leadership I've ever seen. So thinking about leadership as a design process means that suddenly we have a whole set of tools for leadership. And as I said, you can't get there if people don't go with you. I can't make my clients do the right thing. I have to inspire them to do it. And to do that, I have the tools to actually visualize that future in an exciting way. The second one I mentioned earlier, we're not separate from or above nature. The idea that we've been given dominion over nature is a dangerous idea. It's a dangerous relic, really, from a previous age where we just didn't know, and if you look at human history, how little we knew for most of history. We were just making up stories in hopes that they might, help us. But we had the extraordinary experience of going into the jungle with E.O. Wilson in Panama, who's made, E.O. Wilson's, plausibly the greatest life scientist working today. And he explained that there really is only one thing on the planet, it's life. And we're an experiment in that life on the planet. We're just one more species. And we are not a kind of special case, even though we have extraordinary capacity. We're really just another form of life. And if we want the kind of outcome of our presence on the planet and our impact on the rest of life to be something other than profoundly negative, we're going to have to get to a higher order of consciousness. This is a project that we did in Panama. It's a new museum of biodiversity. It really was a project that really takes that concept to fruition. It's a study of our efforts to order life. How have we developed our way of thinking that allows us to really understand now the kind of most advanced science of coevolution and where that kind of that really comes from. And then I wanted to touch on this because I think it's really a kind of very relevant principle at the moment. We begin with the idea that designers see the world upside down. In other words, for a designer, good is not interesting. So if things are great, there's no need for design. When things get bad, that's an opportunity. If something's not working, that's a design opportunity. When things are terrible, that's an awesome opportunity. And we are now in an era of awesome opportunities. We have the greatest challenges in the history of mankind. And we have to confront those challenges. We have to win and really find a way to overcome these higher order complex challenges. So the greater the problem, the worse the crisis, the harsher the experience, the more significant the design opportunity. And I wanted to kind of touch on a couple of examples that are really from the book that are really relevant. The first is The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid. It's a work by C.K. Prahalad. And Prahalad was a professor at Michigan State, and he wrote this book, and it basically explains that almost all the design in the world is crowded around the top billion people. So there's a little over 1 billion people at the top of the pyramid, the wealthiest people in the world. They have access to almost all the design thinking. Almost all of design work is really aimed at that target. Very little finds its way down the pyramid to the rest of the world population. And what he was trying to show and argue is that when you go down to that, the big population, the remaining 6 or 7 billion people, and you really design solutions for them, you can, first of all, there's a huge opportunity, the fortune, and also a huge impact, and you can revolutionize the top. So when you do that, you really change things at the bottom, and I'll show you. Change things at the top because it's so difficult. One of the examples that he uses is this Aravind Eye Institute, and an Aravind doctor does over 4 times as many surgeries as a normal doctor, and they focus only on eye surgery, and they have rethought everything about that process. So they redesigned how doctors speak to nurses. They redesigned everything, and as a consequence, they have a 400% increase in efficiency, and about I think it's about half of the people receive the treatment for free. So, you have a kind of service where you can deliver the highest quality healthcare in the world, and half the people get it for free. So, so money is not the barrier to access. Dean Kamen invented the iBot. It's also it was really he was looking at somebody trying to get over a curb on the street in a wheelchair, and he thought, we've been doing that for 200 years. Basically the same technology. And he said, there's got to be a way to allow people to climb upstairs with a wheelchair. It took him 13 years, a lot longer than he expected. But he built a wheelchair that actually balances on 2 wheels. And it means that a person in a wheelchair, like Chuck Close in this picture, can actually work at effectively standing up and interact with people. And it fundamentally changed what life in a wheelchair means. And I want to end with the work of Rebecca Richards Cordum. Rebecca took on the problem of putting the modern doctor's office into a backpack that can be off the grid for a couple $100 using only solar energy. And the impact is really profound. The little microscope that's shown here can be produced for $220, and it replaces a $40,000 piece of equipment. So that's the kind of fortune at the bottom of the pyramid in action, where you're actually disrupting the business of a $40,000 piece of equipment and giving people, and especially women in this case, access to healthcare, for a tiny fraction of the cost. So that's really those are the principles that I wanted to touch on, and I would end with this idea that we cannot afford the luxury of cynicism. Our work is, we as designers, we don't have the luxury to turn away from a problem and say, that can't be solved, or that's not possible, or our work is to accept the challenge in every case and lean into it.
And it makes sense to realize how little sense we are using in the way we are living now. And so first of all, thank you, Bruce. It's such a gift to have you here today, sharing with us, sharing your mindset and the way you see things, that obviously is just another way of seeing things and seeing life. And the more we expose ourselves to people who see other parts that we are not seeing, the more we can learn. So definitely this has been a day of great learning with you, Bruce. And I have so many questions. I don't know where to start, but the first one is that I'm Guatemalan, as well as more or less 17 million of people. And we live in a part of the world that is one of the most mega biodiverse. Guatemala is in the 20th list of most mega biodiverse countries. And the thing is that we don't know that. Basically, we as Guatemalans, we haven't realized where we live and what we have. So my question is, how do you see what you haven't seen, although it's right in front of you? What do you think that we could do collectively and individually to really awaken consciousness, as you say, on a higher order, to realize that we have so much more than what we thought?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And I think in some ways, MC24 is built to answer that question, holistically, to really think about the complexity of that problem. There are some specific principles that I think really are important. Obviously the first one, first inspire. You have to, I think, if you think about the way that we've been thinking about the environmental movement, for, 50, 60, 70 years, since Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, every year since then, we added more cars to the world, more internal combustion engines. So every year, things have gotten worse. Every year. I mean, not one year out of those 70 years did we say, hey, let's try something else this year. Right? Like, let's take the number down instead of up. No, we actually, the people making cars inspired people, and we did not. We scolded them, and we defined our future negatively. We said, stop doing things. Instead of inspiring them with a vision of the future that is more beautiful, more exciting, more compelling, more intelligent than the stupid old things that we were doing. But we keep doing that. And so I think if we're going to get to what you're asking for, we have to inspire people and not punish them and scold them. The second principle I think that I didn't talk about is rise above the noise. Think about people and their lives and the media and the onslaught of information. It's a constant challenge to get above what we call the hubbub. And there's only really two ways of doing it, which is to, concentrate your efforts. So focus and really get, work on something that's going to make a difference, or cut things that don't matter. You either align things and focus the energy, or you cut things and kill things that you're wasting time and energy on, so that you can put that energy on a single thing. And so really understanding how to get above the noise, how to rise above the noise is critical if we're going to succeed, because we need people to somehow hear this message in the chaos of their life, and seemingly kind of expanding and never-ending chaos.
Yes, definitely inspiration makes more sense than punishment. We humans are more likely to, to walk or to travel or to do whatever we have to do, especially if it requires an effort, if we feel inspired, than if we feel obliged. So thank you, Bruce. Can I ask you to stop sharing your screen so we can have the whole image? And I have the pleasure to share this space with Maria del Carmen Aceña, who was key in the process of Guatemala, and she has been involved in so many different projects related to education and justice, and also Monica Stein, who is a key actor in Guatemala and especially at the Universidad del Valle. So it will be fun and nice to share this space and share our questions with you. So I will be happy to hear Monica and Maria del Carmen also.
Thank you, Emilio. Thank you, Bruce. That was an amazing presentation. And it seems that a lot of what you presented represented Guatemala. We are a young nation. We have severe development problems. But you started with a very interesting phrase, which was the core of design is empathy and understanding the experience of someone else. We're a multicultural nation. We have different indigenous groups. We are a very socially stratified nation. So how do we go about putting ourselves in each other's shoes and using design for empathy when we are so diverse? How can we take that and make it into an opportunity?
Well, I think it's interesting because I think the basic impulse of empathy that, as I said, is at the core of design, is also the solution to some of the worst problems that we're facing. In other words, if you think about what racism is, it's an inability to understand and empathize with the life of someone else. And that extends to, the person. It extends from there to their community, and it extends from there to their ecology. In other words, though all those problems are part of one problem, which is really developing an empathetic relationship with the world. And when we destroy things, when we are cruel and racist and violent to other people, it all comes from an inability to really understand the rest of life and to see ourselves as part of life. And so for me, it really starts there. It really starts with understanding that that we need to see ourselves in that context and see and empathize with the plight of others. The kind of species extinction that we're responsible for at this point. It's heartbreaking, but we're practically unaware of it. We're practically disconnected from the implications of our way of life. And I think the more that we can begin to really understand, the science of it, the impact of it, and ultimately the opportunity, because all of the problems that exist around this issue are all opportunities for the creation of wealth, for the and abundance, and I think that that's where the biggest opportunities are. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And just as a quick follow-up, you talked about leadership and how you have to inspire to be a true leader. And when we talk about creating empathy or being intentional, it has to start from within. So this is a two-part question. What would you recommend that leaders incorporate into their practice from your principles of design in order to change themselves first and be able to inspire others? And then as leaders, create those spaces for collaboration, co-creation, getting to know each other, and putting yourself in other people's shoes.
One of the principles in MC24 is new wicked challenges demand new wicked teams. In other words, we're not going to solve the problem in the singular. We're not looking for a singular leader. And in that chapter of the book, we actually identify the 7 kind of practices of being being a team player on a new wicked team. And if you think about the challenges that you're describing, they don't fit into disciplinary categories. It's not an engineering problem or a graphic design problem, or they're problems that are higher order complexity that overlap with all kinds of things. To really confront those problems, we need complex teams, and that means that a wicked team, what we call a Renaissance team, the leader in that team knows when not to be a leader. They know when to recognize that someone else is the leader right now, and they should be taking charge. And so that kind of humility and it's a confidence that you don't have to be the leader. You don't have to have the answers. If we have the answers, that's the best we can hope for. And it means that those answers can come from a lot of different places. We can take on problems that none of us know how to do. None of us know how to solve climate change. None of us know how to solve species extinction, but all of us do. And if we can think in that kind of team spirit, I think we have a chance to confront even the most vexing challenges.
I have a question. Thank you, Bruce. It's very inspired your new book, and I really don't have the right words right now, but it's very good. I want to know, everything is changing. Technology, communication is making our lifestyle different, but the political system is still the same like 100 years ago. How can we redesign the political system? Because the people don't want to hear about politicians, but politicians are in charge of the country. So if you have any idea, how can we start, for example, here in Guatemala, a movement or a different vision in order to change the political system?
That's a great question, Carmen. It's I think it's one of the great questions of our time. I saw recently a diagram of all the direct reports to the president of the U.S. It's over 200 agencies report directly to the president. If you do the math, that's one a day for every business day of the year. And so if you just spend one day a year on that business, which all of them are multi-billion dollar, many multi-trillion dollar businesses, if you just spend one day a year, that's your entire year, and you don't get to do more. So you realize how impossibly outmoded the model is. The new model is either going to be designed or imposed in a violent way. So we're either going to get ahead and stay ahead and redesign things, or we're going to let it collapse, fall into chaos and violence, and there will be something else imposed in that kind of chaos. Personally, I'm for designing it. And I'd like to get ahead of it and design it and really think about it before it collapses, so that we are not subject to what emerges in violence and chaos, which likely will not be very sophisticated, and will not have the kind of nuance and subtlety and evolutionary possibility that we can imagine if we design it. But what that means is that we have to actually acknowledge the problem that you're naming and say, we can't just go on endlessly trying to make a 200-year-old or whatever the age of it is, hobble along and try to fit the modern world. We need a new way of thinking about it. And I can't help but thinking about what we just talked about, which is a Renaissance team. Why couldn't leadership be a team rather than an individual? Why couldn't it be plural instead of singular? Because that's what we need for the new world. Right? The new world is a higher order of complexity. We need a higher order of complexity to confront it.
Thanks.
Yes, and very much aligned with what Maria del Carmen was asking in terms of politics, that to me, I don't feel inspired at all to be part of a political system that is broken, that is corrupted, that is not able to solve our complexities. But if we can create a new model that can be much more inspiring to be part of, I think that then probably me and people like me would be much more interested in being part of something that is not related to all those things that we don't like anymore, that we don't believe anymore, that we don't want to be part of. So I think that it brings us back to the fundamental need of inspiration, that I also see very much related to optimism and then to empathy. And the same question about politics goes to economics. So how do we redesign the economy that makes more sense, especially after COVID, that we have realized that a lot of things that we thought were so necessary, they are not in truth, in real life. So how do we grasp this window of opportunity that COVID has brought to redesign both politics and economy?
I think you're absolutely right that that COVID has opened a window. I think one of the few gifts of the pandemic is that people have learned that they can change things. That things that we thought were permanent, would never be changed, are suddenly stopped. And you can see the fish in the canals of Venice, and I mean, the impact is really profound, that suddenly we're realizing, wow, we really could change things. And as you said, we're becoming, I think, more aware of the essentials. And I think that actually taking advantage of that opportunity, I mean, people are talking about wanting to go back. I don't want to go back. And a lot of my friends don't want to go back. We want to go forward. And there's a unique opportunity at this moment and in the coming year or 2 years to really take advantage of this kind of energy and the fact that we can change fundamental things. I mean, if you look at work from home, right? I mean, big companies in America are deciding in the process that everyone can work from home, that we can work in new ways. And think about the kind of ecological impact of that. In cities, there are suddenly millions of square feet of space available that we were building relentlessly, as if the model that we had was the only model. And I think the lesson we can learn is that the models are open for consideration at this moment. And we can think about new possibilities. And it puts a kind of urgency on people like the people on this call to do things now while the opening is an opening. Because there will be an enormous force, a kind of enormous force that will push that opening closed to try to reassert a lot of the kind of really harmful, numbskull practices of the past. And we have a unique opportunity to really look at the problem in a new way if we can kind of inspire people to do that.
Bruce, that's incredibly important. And in a country where half the population is under 25, the people that need to be inspired are under 25. The people that need to make the change and participate in this new politics are under 25. But we need to educate them. So what is this opportunity that has opened up now, and how can we shake up education so that it's not numbskulling or skull numbing, sorry, so that it really incorporates these principles of design and gives students and graduates the competitive advantages that thinking differently can give to their work and their impact in the world?
I think that's a great insight and question. What we realized in our work is that one of the principles is designed for the power double, which is a doubling of human capacity multiplied by a doubling of human population. So when you think about what we can do right now, what we're capable of as a global society, the power that we have to solve problems is off the charts. You know, it's like never before in human history. I mean, if you think about the pandemic itself, there's over 150 teams of designers working on a solution right now around the world, sharing information, sharing knowledge. I mean, it's really astounding. So that concept of multiplying power times people is really the answer to the challenges that we have. But it rests on education. It rests on universal access to possibility. In other words, we need every person to be involved in a new culture, to be involved in a new educational experience. And that means changing fundamentally how we do it. We just can't do it the old way and expect to meet the need. So we have to design a new interface to knowledge. And the best people that we've encountered are at ASU in Arizona State University. It's led by a man named Michael Crow. And he talks about what he calls the 5 realms of learning. That there is at the center a kind of what he calls a knowledge core. And then out from that, there are 5 different experiential realms. And the classical one is I go to university and I live in a dorm and I go to classes every day. You know, it's the way that we've been doing it for, you know, hundreds of years. But there's 4 other realms that are radically more accessible. And I think, you know, I worked with Michael years ago on really, you know, pioneering a way of thinking about access and excellence at the university. In other words, to not make excellence a function of exclusivity. Because we mostly in higher education, we still do that. We think if we're exclusive, we must be better. And his insight was, no, actually, that's worse than if you made excellence accessible and really make access to learning our mandate, that we have to provide access under whatever conditions that person is dealing with. So whatever they're doing, our responsibility as designers and educators and governance is to say, we're going to deliver access to those people, you know, under any conditions. And it fundamentally changes how we think about education.
When you were saying, Bruce, that change is going to happen either, you know, as an imposition through violence and chaos, or through design and anticipation, and you said that you were on the design side, and obviously it makes so much more sense to be on that side. But my question is, how do we inspire the status quo?
That's another great question. The principle that would apply is design the new normal. And it also challenges us fundamentally to think differently about how we're doing it. In other words, you know, what we discover is that for people like us, you know, I would say the people on this call, when we hear the words massive change, we get excited. For most people, when they hear massive change, they hold on to their wallet and back out of the room. They don't want massive change. They want massive stay the same. They want things to get better, but be more or less like it is, because I'm okay. And what we discovered, you know, I think working in Guatemala, actually, we discovered that even when things are very bad, in fact, when things are very bad, people become more conservative, not less, because they don't want things to get worse. Right? So they hold on to what they have, the piece of the the system that they can understand and work with, they will defend that piece against progress. And so part of our work as designers has to be, it goes back to empathy, to really understand how people think about this and understand the difference between most people and the pioneers who are going to innovate. Because for someone like me, a very difficult problem is really exciting. And if it's really hard to solve it, I love that. And I want to get in there and really work on that and do my best. And the harder it is, the more exciting it is. And what that has the effect of doing is scaring the heck out of everybody else. And so somehow we have to translate our work into easy, normal, common, easy language. And when we first moved to Chicago, we did some work with Mayor Daley here in Chicago, and he introduced an idea to us that really stuck, and it's really important in this, and that is to reinforce stability to embrace change. It's counterintuitive because we're trying to change things. And he said, you can't just do that. You have to reinforce stability so that people feel confident that they're going to be okay. Then they can have a conversation with you about how we can improve things. And I think that idea is really, really important, in this kind of context.
So I think that this will help. This is the new Bruce Mau book. Actually, it's going to be available this week in Sophos. So it's a great buy. It's not cheap. It doesn't come at a cheap price, but it definitely is worthwhile because it's full of insights and tools that we all can use in our different ecosystems and sectors. So we are going to close this Abierto to open up the Íntimo, which is going to be very hot and exciting because it's when, people, in the audience, Guatemalans from all different places in Guatemala, in the country and outside of the country can come together and ask questions, which is one of the fundamental parts of Nueva Narrativa, is a lot of what we need is in the question and in the process of answering those questions. And the more we do that, both individually and also, very importantly, collectively, we will definitely be in better conditions to move. So we are going to open up the Íntimo, and we are going to invite the audience to be part of this conversation, not just stay, as spectators, but really, as you were saying, there is not much fun playing football on your own, and that's what we've been doing, for years, especially in Guatemala, we've been playing football on our own, and it's not fun. It doesn't serve the purpose, and I think that it's time to come together, to embrace our diversity as a big part of our wealth of being Guatemalans, and to be ready to inspire and be ourselves be inspired by others. And Guatemala is full of inspiration, so it's more a thing on opening up, our sensibility and our capacity to be inspired. So the questions are for whoever wants to start. And thank you very much, Bruce, for this extraordinary sharing of knowledge. Definitely you leave us with our minds, blowing and full of questions. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
We are going to open now officially the space. I see Alejandro Viguria asking and very active on the chat. So I think that I will let the microphone to Alejandro Viguria. Adelante, Alejandro.
Well, yes, I have two questions, and I'm going to try to make them brief. But recognizing that we have that human systems are increasingly putting pressure on natural systems, how do you envision reconciliation of both? And you also mentioned how that there's a need to design in perpetuity, and I see an opportunity to design for resilience. But how do you find this? And how do you envision this mindset behind design within an economic system that is driven by the obsolete?
Those are great questions. And they're kind of, in some ways, all part of one question. Because I think that ultimately, one of the most poisonous ideas ever invented comes from accounting, and it's called externalities. And externalities allows me, as an accountant, to take off of my spreadsheet something that I can't solve. So if I can't solve it, if I can't reconcile it in my system, I take it off and I put it away and I make it an externality. In nature, there is no externality. There's nothing outside of the natural world. And therefore, our system is fundamentally flawed. Right? It's just foundationally weak and problematic. And ultimately, what we have to do is to change our economic system so that we integrate the work of life, that life is actually a producer of economic activity. We have to integrate the caring economy, the work that mostly women do, caring for children and elderly and people in our society, which currently sits as an externality to our economy. We don't think of it we don't think of it as part of our economy. And we have to make the things that we produce and the business that we do in the more in the old economy of GDP, synthesized into this new perspective. This is a concept that was really developed by Hazel Henderson, and she kind of designed it as a layer cake, and showed that what we count as GDP is just one of the layers, and we discount the other layers that are really central to our future. And we've been stealing from those layers for centuries, and those bills are finally coming due. So we have to rethink how our ecology and our economy are one system, that economy and ecology are the same thing. And that is fundamentally transforming these practices. I mean, accounting needs to be fundamentally redesigned as a way of understanding the success of our world, the success of our organizations and behaviors. So I think that's really the outcome, the direction rather. The good news is that people are already demonstrating this. If you look at the work of Gunter Pauli, Gunter Pauli did an extraordinary recovery project in Colombia, where we took hundreds of thousands of acres of destroyed forest and brought that forest back into a productive ecology. And if you had invested with Gunter in that project, you would have done better than buying Microsoft stock at the IPO. Right? And that is really a demonstration of a new way of developing a new kind of economy, what Gunter calls the blue economy, that is a living economy. It's really an economy that we can do in perpetuity. It's where we're going. We're either going to go there by our design and our leadership, or we're going to go there by force, under chaos and crisis.
We have now questions from Ben and then Claudia Hernandez. Adelante, Ben.
Hi. So Bruce, thank you so much. Very inspiring. Question
Thank you.
is, if you think of redesigning the system, going back to Maria del Carmen's question and some other questions, you also have to redesign the process for designing the system. And that process of designing the process basically ends up having a lot of difficulties when people have to lose power. So what advice could you give us for how do you design processes to redesign the system that can inspire people with power to give up their power instead of force them to give it up?
That's a great question.
That's a great question.
Oops, there's a wicked echo there. That's a great question, Ben. I think that what's really critical is to distribute power. I think there are two kind of fundamental ideas necessary for that to happen. One is universal access to education. We are living through an absolutely extraordinary revolution of possibility. I mean, what we articulated and documented in Massive Change was a revolution of possibility, that all over the world, the capacity of people to shape the world was radically expanding. And when you connect billions of these devices that we're connected on, the possibilities are beyond imagination. I mean, it's really the era that we're living in. And as a consequence, the impact is absolutely extraordinary. And I think that we have to, one of the biggest challenges is that people are so convinced that things are getting worse, that they're bad and getting worse. And when in fact, they're good and getting better. And even when we face radical short-term crisis like what we've got right now, where 1 million people have died, even within that, that's a short-term negative in a long-term positive. If you look at the data over the last 200 years, the positive transformation is absolutely staggering. So you've got to get people into an awareness of that reality. The reality is collaboration, cooperation. Like the reality, the dominant reality of our time is what we're doing right now, which is people coming together across boundaries of language, religion, nationality, boundaries that in the past, held us back. And we are collaborating and solving problems that in some cases have vexed us since the beginning of time. I mean, we met the people who took smallpox off the face of the earth. And smallpox killed 500 million people in the 20th century. I mean, it's not an archaic, like, I was shocked. I thought smallpox was like 1600s. No, actually 20th century, 500 million people. So we've got to get people into the mindset that our dominant story is collaboration and cooperation. And then we've got to give them the tools to collaborate, and to be part of it. And that rests on access to education, because if you're not educated, it's increasingly difficult to participate in the opportunity. And if you think about, I like to say that Einsteins are evenly distributed. So geniuses are equally spread out all over the world. But only the ones who have access to possibility will we get the benefit from. And so it's in everyone's interest to bet on everyone being possibly a genius, so that collectively we have the maximum impact, positive impact in the world. And that, that's, I think, the kind of structural work that needs to be done. What you're describing still is a short-term political conflict of people holding on to power, resisting the positive development that must happen for them to have a future. And I think that's where young people really come in, because they have the most future. And I think we want the people with the most future to have the biggest voice.
Excellent. We have Claudia Hernandez and then Mónica Berché. Adelante, Claudia.
Thank you, Emilio, and thank you so much to you, Bruce, for everything you have done for our country. I want to start by saying that because you have believe in us and you are helping us to find a path to find a better version of ourselves as a country. So thank you very much. My question is, when people learn that failure is painful and when we learn that no is discouraging and being different is almost a sin, and we put more value on the things that are traditionally valued in the society, how do you redesign yourself? From your personal experience, how do we do that? How do we create a massive transformation at a personal level?
That's a great challenge. That's a great challenge. I don't know the answer to that question, but I think there is one. You know, I don't think there is an answer. I think that we have to develop a kind of receptivity and a support of diversity. And you know, I think Monica mentioned earlier that you know, I talk about empathy at the core of design method. If you think about what designers do, the kind of common denominator is empathy. That all designers are trying to understand someone else's problem. You know, I did a lecture for the Cooper Hewitt, the National Design Museum in America, in New York, and they asked me to do a lecture on their collection. And when I looked at their collection, it's super diverse. It's every conceivable kind of design thing. And I thought, what is the common denominator here? And the common denominator is caring. Like as a designer, I care about the person and their experience. I care about the citizen and their experience. And I can't care about the citizen without caring about their community, because you can't have a thriving citizen in a toxic community. And by extension, I have to care about their ecology, because I can't have a thriving citizen in a thriving community in a toxic ecology. So I have to really think about the citizen, their community, and their ecology as one kind of holistic enterprise. And I think the more that we do that, the more we overcome racism, which is really not caring about another living thing. The more we overcome the destruction of the environment, because that's not caring about other living things. The more we overcome bigotry and anti-gay sentiment and all the kind of all the other kinds of hatred, which is really not caring. And so I think that developing a kind of design mindset that really starts with caring and starts with trying to understand someone else's experience, so that we can, so that what I'm doing can help, not hurt, can advance and not put people back, can create wealth and not destroy it, that can flourish, have ecologies flourish rather than wither and die. Really comes from kind of putting that empathy and caring at the center.
Mónica Berché.
Monica, sorry. Monica Verche.
Thank you for unmuting me, and thank you, Bruce, for your enlightening presentation. My
Thank you.
question is more about the process itself. And I often seen, for example, in Japan, the Future Cities Design Project, and I was always amazed at how design was really at the core of breaking social boundaries. More than breaking it, they drew from boundary science and started seeing how design could bring different types of communities together. And around a boundary object that sits in the middle of socio-epistemic divides, I call them. We think differently, we come from different cultures, our history divides us, and Guatemala has quite a complex history. So we have you know, a very complex society, and I keep thinking, yes, design can be a form of boundary science and we can choose these boundary objects around which to organize ourselves. But I often feel as an anthropologist that this is a trick that we need to understand beyond the jargon of these beautiful concepts of designing. And my question was about more the mechanisms for bridging the societal divides, the social process that accompanies the design process and design thinking itself. Mm-hmm. So I was saying that usually in inclusive jargon, we hear of allies, and in companies, we hear of binding pivot persons that link larger groups that don't talk to each other. Do you have any insight on the social process that has to accompany design? I've heard you give us highlights of don't be afraid of mistakes, go through the valley of, you know, making a lot of them and all that. But I mean about a code of behavior that then transcends the individual to find these boundary persons that can bridge the societal divides that Guatemala has. What's your experience with this process of building, you know, these pivot points?
Yeah, that's another great question. One of the principles is new wicked problems demand new wicked teams. And the kind of underlying concept is that the challenges we face are at a higher order of complexity than the original solutions we designed. In other words, we now have really super complex ecosystem problems. So the problems that we're going to have to solve this century are really, you know, very, very complex ecosystem, you know, systematic problems that no one person can possibly solve. So in the past, you could have a, you know, a very talented person who could master multiple domains and really, you know, be a Renaissance character and, you know, solve, you know, big challenging problems. But today, it's really beyond the realm of any individual. You realize that you need complex teams. You need Renaissance teams. You can't have a Renaissance person because the bodies of knowledge are so vast that it's almost impossible even to master one, let alone multiple you know, bodies of knowledge. And so what you have to do is develop a methodology of the Renaissance team and to be able to bring people together and collaborate in new ways. And it turns out that it's not, I mean, there's a kind of natural tendency for people to do it, but you actually have to develop a methodology. And so we've actually outlined the kind of seven behaviors of a wicked team player. And two of them are really kind of important in this context, in this discussion. And that one is be willing to lead. In other words, as a team player, you have to be willing to take on leadership and be the leader in a particular situation. But the second one is be willing to follow. In other words, part of being a wicked team player is not holding on to leadership when it's not naturally yours. In other words, when you're not demonstrating leadership. In the old system, you got leadership because of seniority. You got it because of age. You got it because you had the job longer than other people. None of that qualifies you, actually. So expecting that that's how we're actually going to make success and decisions is not the future. It is really important to actually understand that there is a kind of behavior that has to be learned and cultivated if we expect people to collaborate. And when I'm a fellow at Northwestern University here in Chicago, and we are developing what is called whole brain engineering. And it's really a methodology of analytics and creativity. So it's like, it's not the classical engineering, which is really, principally analytics. It's also using the kind of creative side to explore, different ideas, different questions. And I thought that all designers, all people that I would call a designer, like an engineer, I thought they already did that. But I discovered that actually there are plenty of classical people who have no capacity to collaborate. They're brilliant in their own way. Like, I'm not in any way undermining their extraordinary nature, and sometimes do absolutely, brilliant solutions in their category. But the problems that we face are not in categories anymore. They don't fit into the classical domains of knowledge. They are sprawling ecological challenges. And we need a method that actually meets that challenge with a design system that can actually function in that context. Does that make sense?
It does.
I'll take silence as a yes.
Definitely. It's kind of overwhelming, all this, this access to understand that we have become much more complex than what we thought we were. We have Laura Siqueiros and Caterina raising their hands. Adelante, Laura.
Thank you. Bruce, thank you for this. It's been like really illuminating and really nice to open this whole view of design for me. Now in education, my question is about this, like in education, how do you measure or monitor impact? I mean, if you could illustrate that with examples of your experience, it would be great, because I know it's a very subjective area. So it would be interesting to see what your experience has been like.
That's another great question. I think one of the most interesting realizations in our work is that in education, the product is not content. It's experience. In other words, almost all universities and schools think that the product that they're delivering is the content. But we look at a technical degree today. If you're doing a 4-year technical, higher education degree, half of the information is outmoded by the time you graduate, because the world is changing so rapidly that you're learning technologies that are being replaced. So if the content is the product, half of the product is broken. So you realize actually the product is not the content. The product really is the experience, but we do almost nothing to design the experience. So the experience of higher education, and actually all education, is almost default. In other words, we just accept the way that it's done, and we keep doing it because it worked pretty well for the last few hundred years. But we're now in a situation where it no longer works well, because the person on the receiving end is fundamentally different. They're no longer the person who had no access to information. They have an almost unlimited access to information. And so what you really have to think about quite differently is to think, okay, my real product is experience, and therefore I need to produce experience, design it, and measure it. You know, we did a project, I think about 13 years ago, with Arizona State University and a man named Michael Crow, who's the president of ASU. And we had created a little school in Canada called the Institute Without Boundaries. And it was purpose-driven, entrepreneurial, experience-based learning. In other words, it wasn't about me having a piece of paper filled with content and you being able to replicate my piece of paper. It was neither of us knowing what was on the paper, and together we're going to create a new piece of paper filled with new ideas. And it was fundamentally different. And it really used purpose as a driver. And what we discovered is that when people have purpose, they will break the box to learn. If you can inspire a generation with purpose, they will cross boundaries. They will do anything they need to learn. Once you've got that purpose-driven energy happening, it's really quite extraordinary. Michael Crow saw what we were doing and was interested in that, and he commissioned us to work on a project that eventually became known as the Challenges Ahead. And he asked me how to raise $1 billion for the university. My response was I think you have the wrong number. That's my first response. My second response was, if you had to do that, you'd have to do it in a new way that is true to Michael's real vision, which is that we falsely oppose access and quality, access and excellence. So at least in the American system, we think that if it's exclusive, it's better. It's a higher price, it's better. And we make it more and more exclusive and more expensive as a consequence. And Michael wanted to go the other direction, to say we should make it less expensive and more accessible and more excellent. And those are not in opposition. We can actually do all of those things. And we did that. We did a project, and basically the idea was, let's use the challenges that we face. I mean, think about the challenges. Just walk outside and you will see the challenges, the greatest challenges in the history of mankind are right in front of us. Students want to solve those problems. They want to be involved. They want to learn how to do it. They want to create wealth. They want to have impact. And if you can design around purpose and inspire them to do that, you can have a huge impact on the system. We ended up raising $10 billion, not one. ASU is now, I think, the biggest campus in America. They're growing dramatically and getting more and more people access to learning. And Michael has drawn what he calls the fifth wave, which is the 5 realms of learning around the core knowledge. So if you think about a university having a kind of core of knowledge that we can access, the one experience is I go to the university and I live there for 4 years, and I go to classes every day, like 200 years ago, and that's my experience. And that's a great experience. It can be really wonderful. But we realized that that's not going to reach the numbers that we need to reach. And therefore, we need to make completely different experiences around that core that allow greater and greater access without in any way reducing the quality of learning. And that's what they're working on. And I think that ultimately, that's what we have to get to. We have to get to that level of inspiration as a core, as a kind of way of thinking and working, and abandon the kind of false dichotomy between excellence and access.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. That resumes a lot of the questions that I think that I have seen in the chat, and also what Claudia was asking on purpose. How to reinvent ourselves. I think that the bigger and the clearer our purpose, the closer we will be to achieve an extraordinary life, not just for us, but for others. We have two last questions. One is Caterina, and another one is Marco Cerezo. Adelante, Caterina.
Hi, Bruce. Thank you for this magical night. I just wanted to ask you, what is the biggest advice you give to the youth, since we have so many responsibilities, but also such an immense opportunity for change?
That's a great question. The answer to that question is principle number 24, which is work on what you love. And it's the last one for a reason, because I have to say that I wasn't sure that it was a principle. I thought maybe that's just too soft. It's a kind of, nice thing to say, work on what you love. But I realized over time, when I give a lecture, almost every student that I talk to is asking about, they're asking the question that you just asked, which is, they can see that I live a life of ideas and love. I have an absolutely extraordinary life of adventure with people that I really love. Like when I went to Guatemala, I fell in love. I fell in love with some of the people on this call, and I fell in love with the place and the culture, and we had, the kind of most wonderful adventure together. Doing this work. That was possible because when I was quite young, I had this kind of weird idea in my mind that there was a kind of thin layer around the whole planet. It's like a filament, a little kind of layer of connectivity, and it was a thin filament. And in that kind of layer, there were particles. And the particles were very, very far apart, and they were people. And they were the people that I needed to do my work and who were looking for me. They didn't know I existed. They never heard of me, but I was the perfect person for them. And if they could find me, we could do amazing things together. And I realized that the only information that worked in that thin layer was truth. That I had to put out a pure signal so that they could find me. And the more that I put out that pure signal, the longer I put it out, the more consistent I was, the more chance they had, the better chance they had of finding me. And I was very fortunate. I found one in New York. I found one in Paris, one in Rotterdam, one in LA, two in Guatemala. It was, and I've been, I consider myself one of the most fortunate. But to do that, I lived as a student for many years. I lived very modestly so that I could not compromise my work. And I had a client in the early days that was a group called New Music Concerts in Toronto. And they wanted me to do their posters. And so I said, look, I'll do the posters for your very, very low budget, but you cannot change anything. If you don't like it, I'll do another one. And I'll keep doing them until you're happy. But you cannot tell me how to fix it. You can just say yes or no. And so they said, okay, that sounds like a deal. And so I did that. They never said no. And I made some of the most beautiful things I've made because it was pure. You know, it was a kind of pure signal. And I think that's the challenge for young people, to really let the world know who you are by putting out a pure story that isn't trying to be someone else and isn't trying to be what you think we're looking for. Just tell us the truth about you so that we can find you, because we're looking for you.
Thank you. That's a great advice.
Thank you.
I love this concept of purity. We have 3 beautiful minds who have raised their hands. I really respect them, for different reasons. One is Marco Cerezo. He's someone who has lived the whole mindset of being much more conscious about taking care of our natural resources. He's Marco. Jose Quiñones is a very well-known lawyer, and Steve Dodenhofer is a North American living in Guatemala since something like 30 years ago. So 3 interesting characters, very different from one another. So I think that it would be nice to close this Intimo with these last 3 questions. So please, Marco.
Sounds good.
Well, thank you, Emilio, and great being with you. It's a great evening. Actually, I think the challenge, Bruce, I work in conservation, in nature conservation, and one of the challenges is how we can redesign culture to move towards a culture of life. But I think that the challenge in this is the same as in the political evolution. I was reading an article today that said that there are over 100 militias in the US. And I see this polarization in the American politics, but it's happening everywhere. In Guatemala, we have a huge polarization that's basically putting our country in a political impasse. I have read speculation about a potential ethnic war in Guatemala into the future. So it seems that we are still trapped in this mentality that solutions will come if I am able to defeat my enemies, my adversaries. If I only could do whatever I want, if I defeat my adversaries, then I can build solutions. And it seems that this is believed by all the parties. So I think I was looking at your principles. How can we, and I think I'm rephrasing Monica Berger's question, is how can we work towards a culture that accepts that in order to build solutions to these complex problems, we will need to work with our former adversaries? How can we make that switch of mentality? Because we need this in politics, we need this in ecology, we need this in feminism, we need this in ethnic relationships. So that's my question for you. Thanks. And great seeing you, great meeting you.
Yeah, nice question. That's really a beast. I think that one of the challenges that we are dealing with is a lack of imagination. It's a lack of the ability to empathize and experience someone else and not see it as a conflict and a kind of act of violence. If you think about the kinds of things that we do still, I use the quote that we treat the ocean like a pantry and a toilet. It's kind of crazy the way we behave. And that I think extends through a lot of our culture. And we I mean, I find it really extraordinary how we come to accept really terrible things, like waste. You know, we just start with the concept of waste as if, you know, you absolutely have to have waste. And you don't, actually. You can completely change it if you think differently. And so I think one of the challenges, you know, the kind of core challenge, I'd say, is that we have so many people who have learned how to live very badly, you know, very, very poorly in terms of what is possible. The good news is we have so many young people in the world who have not learned the stupid ways. And I think that ultimately the young people are the solution to the challenges that we face, because they don't understand why you would do it in the stupid old way once they see a new way of doing something. And I think that we have to find a way to transition as much power as possible to the youngest people that we can get, who aren't yet entrenched in really, you know, the really terrible practices of the past. So I think that that's where I believe the possibility is, and it's why education is so important to our future. And I mean, if you look all over the world, we put it at the bottom of the list of status. You know, like we don't invest in it. We don't pay people well who do it. We don't innovate. You know, we're not doing what we need to do if we're going to confront the kinds of problems that you're talking about. And I think they're the ticket. They're the people who, if you think of them as a vector, they can deliver the message in a way that we can't. And if we give them what they need to deliver that message, they will change the world and change the terms of the discussion. And there's, you know, by the way, plenty of examples of how they've already done that.
Thank you, Bruce. Jose Quiñones, adelante.
Hi. Well, I think I tend to agree with Marco, and it's amazing that as Emilio mentioned, we come from different worlds, but we tend to think the same. And one of the questions I had is that you talked about this message, stay the same, which is something that really concerns me, because sometimes I feel that we're like preaching to the convert. We tend to talk among ourselves, but there's a huge amount of people outside that may not agree with this concept of the necessity of change. And there's a great video that about this different way of seeing the world. This is about it's something Jonathan Haidt came up with from NYU Stern, where he shows the same story of progress from one point of view, from a liberal point, and then from a conservative point, and then you end up realizing that people are seeing the world in different ways. And my feeling and my question, Bruce, is there a way of trying to reach out to those people that Marco was saying, where we understand, if it's from a design process, there's this empathy side that we need to understand actually where they're coming from and understand their needs. I mean, if there's so many things that we measure differently. Success is measured in revenues. happiness is measured in acquisition of assets, for example. So changing this mindset requires, and my question is, requires that for us to understand where people are coming from, so that we can actually find a common ground, so that we can start understanding each other, and then realizing that we need, if there is a way of changing, we need to do it together, not as Marco was saying, confronting each other, but actually walking the same path. So basically the question is there any way of trying to start or crossing the bridge and starting to reach out to people that may not be thinking the same way we are thinking right now?
Well, I think that is actually happening a lot more than you realize. Like, I think you're absolutely right that all those things need to happen. One of the companies that I work with is called Freeman, and we produce trade shows and exhibits in America and all over the world. And it's like we produce over half of the major trade shows and exhibits in America. And what we realized, actually, it's an idea that came from the chair of the company, a woman named Carrie Freeman. And it's a family company that's over 90 years old. And they have extraordinarily good people and good values. They start, empathy is one of their core values, and these values weren't made up by an advertising agency. They actually, someone just had the good sense to actually write down how the people behave and who they really are. And one of the things that she said is that we do a lot of medical shows, and if you go to a medical show, there's like we do the heart show and the diabetes show, and the big exhibits, like tens of thousands of people, and people come from all over the world, across nationalities, languages, cultures, enterprises, and they come and they all get together for several days, and they share knowledge and they educate one another, and they introduce new products, and they change the world, and they collaborate, and they inspire each other. And it turns out that the number one reason to go to shows is to be inspired. And what you realize is that, Carrie said, like, one way of describing our work is that we put on a trade show or exhibit. Another way is to say we help doctors change the world and save lives. And I think actually understanding how important commerce is and the mechanisms of the market in our collective well-being and vision, and I think understanding that like, one of the things when we did Massive Change, one of the things that really struck me, and I kind of discovered it in that project, because we were looking at people who were solving the hardest problems. That was the common denominator. Like, we were looking at people who were, taking on like extraordinary problems all over the world. And what we saw was that some of them were using social instruments. They were using the social institutions and the social instruments of society to collectively take on these very complex challenges. Other people were using the mechanisms of the market and really using the what the market is capable of to take on the problems. And what I realized was that there was a new kind of political axis developing that was not left and right. It was not the classical political axis, because I'm Canadian, so I start on the left. Like, we say that Canadian birds fly in circles. We don't have any right wings. And And so, so I was naturally suspicious of the market. But what I realized is that, you know, I saw on the left, the classical left, really lame brain ideas. And I saw on the right really lame brain ideas. And I saw across the spectrum really extraordinary, innovative, new ways of thinking, using both of those, you know, all kinds of different mechanisms of social institutions and markets on a new axis that was really about advanced and retrograde. And I realized that that's actually the axis that I'm more interested in, and that we need to develop, because what you realize that I have more in common across the spectrum with people who are advancing human society. And I have less in common across the spectrum with people who want to go backwards. And collectively, our commitment has to be to one another to go forward, because it's the only way out of here.
Thank you, Bruce. We are going to have a last question. It has been an amazing space, you know, full
It
of,
really has.
full of opportunity.
I'm enjoying a lot.
I love your aperture and your openness and your, you know, you're willing to share all your knowledge, Bruce. Thank you very much. We're going to give the space to Steve. Adelante, Steve.
Hey, Bruce. Most of the great challenges we see on Earth at the end of the day are related to fear. Mako mentioned politics in the US. Quite clear how many votes will derive from fear in the next couple weeks there. Fear of equality, gender, people of color, indigenous people, whatever. Fear of science. Look at what's happening with climate change and COVID related to the fear of recognizing science and embracing science. Fear of the other, fear of change in general. Design, by its innate nature, provokes change. Oftentimes, those that have the most power and resources are the most shackled by fear. We're taught from the time that we're born the narrative that that the powerless are afraid, when it's normally quite the opposite. It's normally women are bravest, poor people are bravest, people in difficult situations tend to be the bravest, and the people that hold power, the people that have the most resources, tend to be the ones that are the most shackled by fear. And because of this, they oftentimes try to block any positive change, because they don't want to see anything happen. So how can we design in a way that helps liberate people from fear, so that they can develop empathy for the other, so that they can embrace changes to the status quo and help advance society?
Mm-hmm. That's another great question, a great question to end on. Thank you, Steve. You know, it takes us back to the first principle, which is first inspire. Because I think that, I don't think designers and all kinds of people with the capacity to design, in other words, people who wouldn't call themselves designers, but who are in the business of imagining a future, because that's the common denominator of design. I don't think we realize how powerful we are. I don't think we realize how powerful it is to show people a positive future and to show them what being there could be like. I mean, the tools that we have now to envision things they were unimaginable. I mean, what I have in this computer would have taken a multi-million-dollar studio just 10 years ago. And more, we have access to these extraordinary tools to envision the future. And there's a woman at MIT called Neri Oxman who says that 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 technology catches up to imagination. In other words, we build what we imagine. And so I think it's so important for us to engage a methodology and a process and a cultural movement to imagine a positive future. And to imagine all the things that happen in that positive future, the kind of extraordinary possibilities that we could create. Because the more that we do that, the more we inspire people to go there. And the more that we undermine fear. And I think, you know, a friend of mine in Brazil did her thesis on that relationship between imagination and what we build. And she showed, I mean, it was stunning, her work, where she showed that when you create images of the future, you eventually build that image. You build the thing that you saw as a kid, you know, the kind of extraordinary science fiction idea that was really exciting. You end up working on it and creating it, you know, as an adult. And what her concern in her thesis was that we're mostly producing dystopian images. We're producing, so, you know, our fictional, I mean, look at our fictional production. So much of it is actually dystopian. But we're living the results of a utopian vision that came before us. That people imagine this extraordinary ability to fly around and, you know, all the kinds of things that we take for granted now. You know, the video phone, which we're using right now. And all those things came out of you know, a positive imagination of the future. And I think that, you know, if there's one thing we can do, it's really to commit ourselves collectively to a positive imagination of the future, because that's the way to undermine conflict and fear and violence and bigotry and racism. All those things are really, you know, they're imagining that there's only one pie and we're going to slice it, when instead we can imagine more pies. We can imagine infinite number of pies, and we don't need to slice it.
We build what we imagine, and technology catches up with imagination. Thank you, Bruce. It has been amazing. I'm going to ask everybody here from the 125 people who are still with us to put in one word on the chat, what's this key word that they are going to take to bed tonight, and that word they are going to wake up tomorrow with. You know, because we need to keep up with this conversation, you know, and to nurture it, and to really understand that imagination can take us to places we haven't been to. But we need to accept our capacities and our potential that probably for one reason or another, we haven't been able to recognize. So this is an invitation to see within, you know, and to realize that we have much more power than what we have ever thought, and put it in value and use it and do it in a collective way. So that's the invitation to everyone. Please, in one word, leave on the chat, what are you taking from this amazing conversation, 2-hour conversation with Bruce Mau in Nueva Narrativa. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We feel very grateful for sharing with us, you know, your, not only your knowledge, I think your spirit, your soul, you know, and I guess that that soul comes with age. And take it as a compliment, because it is, you know,
I'm just getting started.
I've known you for several years, and I can see, you know, how you have evolved in so many ways, and it's obvious, you know, when one listens to you, it's like this voice coming from, you know, from somewhere else. So we feel very grateful. you know, to you, Bruce, to you, Monica, to you, Maria del Carmen, and to everyone.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you for
Thank you.
everything. For
Thank
the
you, Maria del
inspiration.
Carmen.
Thank you very
Monica.
much. It was
Thank you.
excellent.
Unfortunately, I will have to close down this abierto, but the conversation keeps open. So I say goodbye to everyone. Good night. Have
Bye-bye.
sweet dreams. Imagine what we haven't imagined.